Hello, everyone. I'm Captain Logan, and joining me again is the Day Ghost. It's time for another episode of The ReQuest, and today Carl Maxey requested a film that came out in 2017. And what is the film in question today, Austin?
It is The Man Who Invented Christmas, and we are not talking about God or Jesus. We are talking
Oh.
specifically about Charles Darwin. Wait, no. Start over. Scrap this entire video.
I thought that was a joke. I thought that was an intentional lead-up joke.
No, I had a brain fart mid-joke.
I was really wondering where you were going. I was like, how is he going to make this Darwin joke actually work? Do you want to actually start over?
No. Staying in.
So, it's The Man Who Invented Christmas, which is something of a misnomer, because obviously there was already Christmas. But the idea is that Charles Dickens made Christmas the arguably much more popular than it was before and ever would have been without him and A Christmas Carol, which is an interesting notion to try to explore in a movie. It's a thing that I had only really heard recently. Like, it had never really occurred to me that the commercialism of Christmas really kind of starts with that book. I never really thought of that. And it was a movie that I saw previews for just before it came out, and then unceremoniously completely forgot about after that. Like, I didn't even remember the name of this movie, and when it came up, last week on the show, we mentioned what we were doing next, and we were both like, I don't know what that is. And then when I sat down and watched it, I was like, oh yeah, that's right, I saw commercials for this. It's that weird Charles Dickens movie where a bunch of characters from that book show up and look like they probably intrude on a biopic that might have been more interesting to just, see a story about Dickens' life. And I was skeptical of it. That was not a thing I really wanted to rush out and see. Like, I was waiting to hear people see it and talk about it, and I never heard anybody say anything about this movie, so I just completely forgot about it.
No, I had the exact same experience with you, because I also remember seeing previews and being like, oh, they're making a Charles Dickens movie where he's talking to A Christmas Carol characters. And I just remember thinking, like I get that A Christmas Carol is like a popular story of his, but I would rather see one that's maybe just about Charles Dickens and not specifically that story.
Yeah, like, that can be in there. But it's sort of like, and this wasn't a good movie or anything, but it's sort of like Bohemian Rhapsody, where it's like, yeah, you call that movie that, but you don't want the entire movie to just be like how Queen came up with Bohemian Rhapsody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's you kind of like aggrandize this one story, I think, by doing that, which was something I was just kind of like, I'm not super interested in that. And I do think it ultimately does fall into that Bohemian Rhapsody trap that a lot of biopics do, which is biopics that are completely fictional.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't always mind that if there's, a real good angle and the story is intriguing, and like, I really care about the character as kind of a fictional character. Like, I've said this before, and you have to have, I think, a case-by-case attitude about it, because
Of course.
You know what you know, you've seen what you've seen, so if it's a thing that you're really familiar with and you know the history, then you come up with expectations and preconceived notions, and that's going to affect your enjoyment of the thing. You're gonna want it to be more accurate. There's no way around it, right? Like, maybe it can win you over in the same way as like a comic story to movie or a book to movie or something, where, like, okay, they didn't handle this anything like the actual material did, but the story itself is really interesting and they had their own take, so now I'm with it. I think that's maybe harder to do with history, if you really know the history and you're invested in that and you really like that. But I've had this before, and I've talked about this a lot with reviews with biopics. One of the movies that got me a lot more interested in biopics just as a genre, and I think of myself as kind of a biopic fan now, like, I gravitate toward these things, was Saving Mr. Banks. And that's a movie that, just like this, like, entirely fictional. If if you care about the author of Winnie the Pooh, maybe even in an offensive way. And yet the story I thought was really good. But if I like I was invested and I teared up at the end and I cared about those characters and I liked even their fictional Walt Disney. But if I had known more about that, it might have bugged me. I might have been offended by it. And so
yeah, that's a movie I can't watch. Or not can't watch. It's a movie I'm apprehensive about watching just because of that.
Yeah, and for really good reason. So again,
it's definitely case by case.
It's case by case, but in general, I want to say that if I'm a narrative guy, I'm a fiction guy first. Like if you're telling a story that's based on a true story, but you take creative license and you're it is at the end of the day a fiction. It's a story about a person who is based on a real person but didn't exactly really live. It's a little bit sticky, but if you stick the landing in the way that you would in any fictional story, it's easier to win me over than it might be some other people. This falls somewhere in the middle for me, where I know a tiny bit about Charles Dickens. Obviously, I've read some Dickens here and there, and I know a Christmas Story. I know A Christmas Carol, but I don't like A Christmas Story. I know A Christmas Carol really well because I've seen a million different versions of it, and I read the book when I was a kid, and I've always really liked that story. So this is a thing where I know the fictional material, but I don't really know that much about what happened in real life, and so. You could have won me over on the fiction with this pretty easily because I don't really actually know what happened and I didn't do any homework before watching this. But just getting into the brass tacks of it, Austin, I wasn't sure there was... I was skeptical until a good 2/3 of the way through this movie as to whether there was even a story here, and that made it difficult to have the good time with it that I was hoping to. It really felt like, in a weird way, it felt like it was going into prequel places before it was doing anything.
It absolutely does. You have moments like he's walking and somebody says like, "Oh, bah humbug," and he's like, "Oh, that gives me this great idea."
Well, and I'm okay with a couple of those because that's how writing fiction works, right? Like, I'm real torn with this movie. Let me just say that right out the gate. Like, this is going to be a tougher sign flip for me, because there are things that I think this movie really nails about, particularly the like the experience of trying to write a novel, and like the out of body experience that a lot of authors have, and that certainly as a writer I have experienced, and the way it deals with process and stuff is sometimes kind of interesting, and then the way it deals with inspiration works sometimes and doesn't work other times. So you're gonna write what you're gonna take things from most. Stories don't come out of just absolute whole cloth. So to say that every time Dickens in this movie sees a thing that gives him an idea, or like he's collecting names and then he puts them in his book, I think to say that every time that happens it's just the like nostalgia member-berry thing is a little bit disingenuous. But I do think that
it's got moments with it. The big one is at the end where he's talking to the cop and he's like, "What's your name?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm Copperfield, and he just gives a look like,
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's like my real name is Robin moment.
It's not that bad, but
but you know what I mean.
But you're absolutely right. I felt like there were just too many of them stacking up at the beginning, where I couldn't decide if it was just trying to make people who know that story like feel good about themselves because it's like, oh, this is for me. I like this story. I know all the references, where it's just banking too much on nostalgia, or if it was supposed to be like, okay, that he's going to get this book written in time, and it's going to come out, and it's going to change the way people think about Christmas. But isn't it interesting to find out how he did that? And it was too late into the movie before I understood what the story was, like like what the character arc was, where we're actually going with this guy. For too long, it really does just seem like here's all these elements that get all tacked together to become a Christmas Carol, and that's not interesting to me.
Well, and I think if you are going to do something like that, you should have done what actually happened. Because I did a little bit of research into Charles Dickens while watching this. And I think if you had to make a movie about Charles Dickens writing A Christmas Carol, I do think there is an interesting thing you can do there about writers, which is that like across his career before A Christmas Carol, he was kind of prototyping that story in short stories, where like
Yeah,
different aspects of it would show up into different stories, and I
and that
think
I
it's
knew,
really
and I
interesting.
was waiting to hear about short stories, and that never comes up.
Yeah, like basically the entire story of that shows up in an early short story, but instead of ghosts, it's goblins. Interestingly enough,
But see,
but
this movie can't do that because it's going with this idea, and I thought this was maybe a misstep. It's going with this idea of uh, I've I've got I've got this Christmas notion, and I've come up with this character of Scrooge, but I don't know from the beginning even what the genre of the story is. Like am I writing a cautionary tale, or am I writing a fairy tale? And like he doesn't know that from the beginning, and I cocked an eyebrow at that real early. I was like, I have a really hard time buying that you're not in parable territory when you come up with this premise
mhm.
in the first
Yeah.
place, where it's like really you don't know if, and maybe not, but I was skeptical of it. I was like, really, you don't know if you're writing a redemption story when you come up with Scrooge.
Yeah, and I think ultimately I would rather a movie about the kind of real story, kind of take ideas from that and make a story about how writers kind of have specific ideas that they kind of noodle back and forth and come back to, and how that changes and evolves like a Charles Darwin thing over time as you write.
Oh, that's where that was going. Okay.
It was seeded from the start to build here. That was definitely my plan.
I wish there was more of that in this movie, because I thought it was kind of a mistake not to get to the pathos of it a lot earlier.
Oh, for
So
sure.
so
Yeah.
this so ultimately this is a story about an author. You don't know this until halfway or better into the movie, but it's a story about a conflicted author who's nearly bipolar, and I liked that take on Dickens, where like there's a part of him that is it's he's got this Jekyll Hyde thing where he is half Scrooge and half who Scrooge will become at the end of that story, and it's because of the way he grew up, because his family was thrown in a debtor's prison, and he had to work in really crummy conditions at a warehouse or a factory really early on in his life. He had to grow up too fast, and so there's this conflict within him where he can't decide if which of those people he is, and if he really believes in people or not. So and I like this idea that there's a part of him that wants to maybe use Christmas as a way to get people to treat their fellow man better, and there's this kind of there's this thematic idea that keeps coming back over and over again, that like the reason for living is to like take the burden off of other people as much as possible. Like if you've made somebody's life better or easier in some way, then you've done your job as a fellow human being, and that ultimately that's what this story is supposed to be about. But it turns into uh, this thing with Scrooge, who is personified in the movie by Christopher Plummer. Really good casting choice. I haven't seen Christopher Plummer in anything in a while, and he is he's getting up there. He's getting real old, and it's exactly the right time for him to play Scrooge. And there's this interesting internal monologue that he has with him, where it seems like Scrooge for him personifies the evils of the world, and he's trying to decide if in writing this book he wants to try to make the world better, or if he wants revenge on the world for what it did to him as a child, and he can't decide which of those things it is. And I need that there from the beginning, because otherwise it looks like it's just repackaging A Christmas Carol through him in the first place. It's like anytime we make H.G. Wells a time traveler.
Yeah, for sure.
It feels like that.
Because that was the big thing I had, too, was that it felt like they went, let's make A Christmas Carol. Okay, everybody's done A Christmas Carol because they have. How do we make our version different? What if it's like a meta one? And, like, obviously that's not exactly what it is, but there's still a lot of aspects of that.
It kind of is, and it kind of isn't, right? Like, it feels a little bit just uneven and confused in its in what it's after.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in intent, I think. I'm real conflicted on this because, you know, I said earlier that I'm not really buying that this idea doesn't start from the more parable place in the first place. That it would have to always be Scrooge gets redeemed at the end when you come up with this idea, I would think. But the thing I latched onto the most was the conflict about that when we finally get there. So, like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems like a premise that's not really coming together. I'm just having a hard time buying this as an idea, like in the first place, the way it's conceived. Just with this material, I feel like if you can scrap Dickens and scrap A Christmas Carol, there's a story about a writer here, about a fictional writer here that we could tell that could be great.
Yeah, for sure, and I definitely agree with that because, like, there are good aspects there with what you were just saying, and then we're just kind of stuck with, okay, but it also has to be A Christmas Carol. So when he finally decides what it's going to be, the ending is just going to be when Scrooge wakes up and is like, oh, like, I love Christmas now. I'm going to go show everybody how much I care and how...
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And that's awkward and doesn't really work because he already is more or less a good person at the beginning. You know, it's not like he isn't Scrooge. Again, he's got more of this kind of Jekyll Hyde thing, but just about his book. Well, sort of. About the way he sees the world, certainly. It's like, is this a pessimistic person or an optimistic person? He doesn't know until the end of the movie. And that's okay, but to treat it like, because I got through this book and I ended it the right way, the correct way, the way that the girl that works for him thinks that it has to be, where Tiny Tim does live at the end. I kind of like, by the way that she for him actually kind of becomes Tiny Tim, where he gets rid of her on accident and then has to try to bring her back. There's a nice little parallel there. There's these nuggets, man. I mean, there's some good stuff in it, but the idea that he's gotten over all of his insecurities about his father overnight is too quick and too easy, and it doesn't work. And
and it plays as schmaltzy, I think, a lot of that stuff.
It does, and it's supposed to... I think we're supposed to buy it because if the movie is doing its job, we would buy that because Dickens now buys that Scrooge could change overnight. And the problem is that in the kind of story he wrote, I bought it with Scrooge. In a way I don't buy it with him, because they're not the same kind of story. And also because Dickens is a better writer than whoever wrote the script. Not to put too fine a point on it. But there's this whole conflict where he gets writer's block. He keeps saying, "Oh, I'm not blocked," but he is, where he can't decide if it really makes sense that Scrooge would be able to change overnight. This movie has some communication issues too, because I think the idea is supposed to be because of his father, who he's never forgiven for what happened with the debtor's prison, for not being responsible and paying his bills, and not taking care of his family right. Like, he is I'm sorry, I've kind of lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? We always shoot these late.
I know I can say with what you're saying.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
About how if Scrooge can change overnight. That's just.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Sorry. I think the idea is supposed to be that he is realizing that like he thought his father couldn't change, but if Scrooge could change, everybody can change. You can change, I can change, everybody can change.
You gotta do better.
But the way it's presented in the movie, it seems like it's just a logistical question, where he's just trying to decide if the audience would buy that a character could change overnight, not whether or not a character could change at all. So, like, there's the thematic notion there is kind of muddled. And also, it's not really about his father being able to change or not change, right? It seems like, I really thought the idea until I got to the end was that he's using the book initially until he decides that it's a redemption story to punish his father for being poor. Not that his father was irresponsible, but that this is the conflict within him. He doesn't want to be Scrooge. He wants to help people. He doesn't want to have a classism thing. But he also doesn't like that his father put him through what he went through and that he had to be poor. So, like, he wants to help out the poor, but he doesn't want to be poor. He's living in those two worlds, and he doesn't know how to do that. I didn't think it was a redemption story for his father. I thought it was a redemption story for the world. The idea that, like, the world can be better, and we can do that in a way, like, through Christmas and making people understand, like, the tenets and the moral ideas of Christmas. That doesn't shine through the way it should.
Yeah, for sure. And with the whole Scrooge can't change overnight thing, that's only looking at modern day, like how we look at A Christmas Carol, because that's not what that book is. It happens over 3 nights too. Like, that's always how we shorten it down for adaptation. That's
a good point, but it's still 3 nights. It's still a very short period of time.
No, for sure. But it's just
that's
like
a good point.
You guys, do some research before you write like a movie about somebody. I don't know. That's just me.
And it's a little sloppy because I think I hesitate saying this because I didn't want this story to just be It's a Christmas Carol, but Dickens himself is going through it. I actually think structurally that would have been better than what they made.
Oh, yeah?
Because it keeps dipping in and out of that. It's really awkward. How do you have Ghost of Christmas Past come to him to do a flashback about his father going to the debtor's prison, but to complete a flashback you already started before you had that conceit?
Yeah, I don't know.
This is just like story structuring 101 stuff. Like, why did we already... It was weird. We jumped into the past. We had a flashback. And then we had a reason for a flashback. It was weird.
It's all in his head, it's a very complicated thing, the brain.
And I don't know about you, but I didn't find myself sucked into his story really, and I don't know if I ever fully did, because I was always really suspicious of this premise, and the formatting of it. But like, I didn't find myself really invested or moved or anything until it became a more personal story about his father and his past and everything. Before that, it's just, can I get this book in on time? And like, what is it that really leads him to come up with all the ideas in A Christmas Carol? Like, it just wasn't a hook that grabbed me. And I think part of it was because I felt like you could do that with literally anything ever written ever. Like, why Dickens? Why this guy? That question is answered. It's way too late.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of those places where it's kind of like a written version of, say, like a musical biopic where we just have like a formula and it's like, okay, here we go with what you're saying. But like, you could just take that premise and slap it on anybody until it's too late by the point you kind of figure out why it's Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
And it just kind of ultimately feels like, let's make a schmaltzy Christmas movie about a schmaltzy Christmas story we always retell over and over.
And I think some of the writing, I said earlier that like Dickens is better than this movie, writing-wise.
Absolutely.
But I do think that a lot of the writing in this is actually too good for the schmaltzy formula. When you get to the scene where Scrooge, again, really good stuff from Plummer, is essentially begging Dickens to make it a redemption story to save him, and the walls are closing in and all that. It's a great scene. It's a really good scene. Like I don't know if you agree with this, but like I like the way that bit is written. I like those two guys on the screen together, and then immediately after that he's totally changed, and it's way too easy. But you take that scene out of context. If that was the trailer for the film, I'd be like, holy crap! Like there's something here. And it's upsetting that it took that long into the movie before I really cared. I'm not saying that the stakes aren't there, because right away we know that Dickens is down on his luck and his last 3 books haven't sold very well, and he's got a lot of debt, and that's interesting because his father went to a debtor's prison. Again, I wish that was there from the beginning, because I would already understand why he's as freaked out about it as he is. Like, I'm not. This is a we're not in our protagonist's head well enough problem, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. For me, in general, I found this movie dragged through most of it.
Yeah, I did too.
And like it's not 100% like abysmal. Like there are legitimately good moments. I agree with you about that Scrooge scene. I think that's really good, and a lot of the acting in general I think is really good, even if I don't like the material.
I think the casting is great. I think that that maid girl is fantastic.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's just really unfortunate that we kind of follow that Scrooge scene with just, here's the ending of A Christmas Carol. He's going to run around and tell everybody about how he's changed.
Yeah. It doesn't really come together. And I haven't said this with too many things. This is going to be a weird kind of nuanced thing to say, but like, I've seen a lot of movies that have not great scripts that are executed beautifully. This is a movie that sort of has that. Well, I don't know if you agree with this. I think this is a great looking movie. I think like all the period stuff is maybe a little heightened, but like it's pretty believable. The details are there. The location shooting is great. Cinematography is fine, but it's not just a not great story executed really well on the screen. It's a not great story written pretty well. Like a lot of the dialogue seems right to me. It's very strange. It's like writing versus story. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, because none of the dialogue really jumped out at me as like, oh, that's really awful line.
And it doesn't feel like an American movie pretending to be a British picture either. Like, it's a British film.
Yeah, for sure.
And I really appreciated that about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. It's just kind of, from a story structure wise, like, I don't know, it's just uninteresting, I guess. Like, that was just kind of what I had with it anyways.
Yeah, and then when it becomes more interesting, it's just too late. I like this actor. I think he's really good. I don't know if I buy that this is anything like what Dickens was like.
Which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing biopic wise. Like you
Yeah.
said, it's a case by case. Like I can watch a movie like Ed Wood, which none of those characters are anything like what the people are like, but I think that's a really great movie. Um,
Yeah.
Even something like Rocket Man, which I think is closer to real life, but more of like a fairy taleized version.
Yeah.
That's also really good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. But I guess I mean, I'm with you. It doesn't have to be just like it probably was. I don't need historical accuracy, but I do need to believe it within the context of the piece and the internal logic and everything, right? Like,
Mhm.
this is still a world where the Dickens books are what they are. Do you buy that this guy wrote Oliver Twist? I
Mhm.
don't know. I'm like,
Yeah, and if you
maybe.
could just have done an overall um, Charles Dickens thing, it would have been interesting to kind of tie his like early childhood stuff into him making Oliver Twist. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
That because when it first showed up, I was like, "Oh, we're doing some like Oliver Twisty kind of things." Oh, but we're not really going to talk about it.
Oh yeah, and again, I think suspicious is the key word here. I kept thinking the people making this movie really like Christmas Carol have never read anything else by Charles Dickens. Like that's really what it felt like to me.
hmm
And I'm
Yeah,
not a
and
Dickens enthusiast or anything. It's been a long time since I've read Great Expectations or anything else.
I
But
gotta. It's not mine, but I'm looking at a Charles Dickens collection just right off camera right
are you
there.
really?
Oh yeah, my grandma's a really big Dickens fan.
I think I also wanted this movie to be more about what it seems to be selling with the title. Because it's not really about how Dickens changes Christmas. It's about him getting that book written, and then at the end, there's text on the screen that says, and then we never thought of Christmas the same. The end.
No, the I thought the like text at the end was really awkward.
It's pretty awkward.
Especially, it's the type of text where it's like, here's like a bunch of stuff we kind of made up, and then here's like text about what happened after, and I'm like, okay, but most of what is in this also didn't happen, so how can I trust this?
Yeah, at the end of the day, like you said earlier, it's just too much of repackaged um, Christmas Carol, and then there's a potential really interesting angle that comes too late, and it's kind of too commercial for its own good, which is sad. I mean, there's good stuff here, and like I said, it's a really pretty movie. I'm gonna have to go with the red sign flip, which I kind of hate that I'm doing that. But the more, and I wasn't sure coming into this actually which way I would go, but the more I'm like dissecting this just from a writing place. I'm like, yeah, it's not. The story's just not good enough. It's
hmm It's in a way with a lot of how it is earlier of just kind of him putting it together is like the kind of Bohemian Rhapsody early stuff of them of like the kind of prequely things like you said where we're going like, oh look, get it because we're gonna do that later. Like there's the part where he's sitting at the piano and it's like, dun 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 dun, and his girlfriend goes, oh, that's a really nice piano bit, and he's like, it's okay, maybe I can do something with it later. Like it's like that kind of stuff. I don't
now,
know.
to be fair, Rocket Man did exactly the same thing,
Oh no, absolutely, but
but it
Rocket
was
Man's also
it
awesome.
was just a better movie in general.
No, it's that I'm willing to give you things if you're willing to like give me things. You know what I mean? Like if your movie's
Do
good,
you
I
remember
will let
that where
stuff like
he
that
apparently
pass.
has the melody for the uh, for Goodbye Norma Jean, like, or whatever that song's called, like, I don't know, 10 years before he writes it or something, and I was like, I wonder how that worked. I wonder if he really did have that melody like that early.
Well, I think with Rocket Man
Candle in
too,
the
it
Wind, Candle in the
helps.
Wind.
Candle in the Wind, yeah. I think what helps with Rocket Man is that movie is so fairy tale like in general, like
Yeah.
to the point where he's like 10 years old playing Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, and obviously that's not like a real thing that happened, but it's just kind of getting into that character's head in a musical sense. And with what you're talking about, it was just kind of, they were like, well, we got to slap this in somewhere. I don't know, just put it there. But the
Well,
movie
I think
itself is
this
good enough
wanted
that
to be that kind of
whatever.
musical.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah.
Like, I think this thought it was. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think
No.
I think this thought it was doing something closer to the Rocket Man thing, where it was like, we'll have him internalize all these characters in the same way that we internalize all those musical numbers in that movie with Elton John, and I don't think they committed to it in this.
Yeah, because Rocket Man's just a straight up musical.
But also, it's consistent and we're in his head from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have that bookend with that movie. With now we're just talking about that. You have that bookend where he's at that meeting and he is like having to, what is it, like an AA meeting or something, and he's having to, like, break down his past and stuff. And you feel like you're with him from moment one. And with this, I felt real distanced from Dickens a lot of the time, even though I'm seeing, like, essentially literary hallucinations that no one else can see but him. And it's weird. Like, I almost think that maybe, some of that should have been there earlier somehow. And some of that just seemed... I hesitate saying this. Some of that seemed a little bit too easy. I guess everybody has a different process, and writers don't all write the same way. But the idea that you come up with a character's name and then instantly they come alive in your head and start talking to you. I wasn't sure about that. Like I said, I like the out-of-body experience thing, where, like, he starts talking to Scrooge and suddenly the pages just pour out of him. That's great. I like that. And I don't mind personifying the characters. I know sometimes I complain about the hallucination thing. Made perfect sense with this context. I have no problem with that. Like, that's not the issue. That like, the characters come alive and he's talking to them, and, like, translating that to the page, like that all being in his head. That's fine. Like that makes sense to me, as a, like, a weird writing process thing. But
it's just a way of visualizing it.
Yeah. But the idea that just the real definitive way that he says it, where he's like, I need the perfect name, and as soon as I have that, like the character just comes alive. I wonder if anybody works like that. I don't know. Like, names are important. I mean, they certainly inform people, like an actual real human beings, obviously. But that was weird.
Yeah, especially, like, as a writer, like, I don't know, my brain kind of works as, like, a random name generator, so I can just, like, throw out a name, but, like, that doesn't mean I have a character.
It informs them and stuff, but I mean, I can't tell you the number of times that I've changed character names midway through, to the point where I have to,
No, same.
In a Word document, do, like, a find replace. Like, I mean, I've done that. And
Yeah.
I know I'm not alone in that. A lot of us don't even know the name of our piece until we're finished with it, and like you have working titles that keep changing. But I digress. I mean, again, I'm hesitating making that criticism because I guess I could maybe see that happening with somebody, but there was something about it that just didn't play in this, where I wasn't buying it. And like I said, I have that with a lot of stuff with this communication and stuff, where I'm just like, you can make it work maybe, but I'm not buying it the way you're presenting it to me.
Well, yeah, and I think, like, as, like, people that write, that kind of stuff can hit you in a specific way. Because I agree with you about the name thing. Like, when I wrote my novel last year, like, the one character changed his name, like, 4 times. Like, it just kind of happens, And I don't know, yeah, maybe somebody writes like that, but it just feels weird. And it feels, in specific places, just kind of like, oh, remember this? Especially, like I said earlier, the, like, Copperfield line. Like, that entire scene was just, ugh.
See, I didn't hate it. There's good stuff in there, but it needed that script needed another pass.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, just looking into it, like, I would rather just see a story about, like, more so what happened of just him, this, like, writer who just has specific ideas he likes to go back to, and you just kind of see that progress over time. I think that's probably what I would want to see, but But it's
And
just it's throwing out a movie and being like, I would rather see this movie, which isn't
yeah,
fair. But
yeah, of course. Like you don't want to rewrite it and be like, well, what you should have done was made a different movie. And yet, I did feel that way a little bit. Like I wonder, because I said it's too commercial for its own good, and obviously it is still a commercial product, and it's got to justify its existence in a monetary way. Does the just straight up Charles Dickens biopic sell? Maybe, depends on how you package it. Could you do something closer to what you're suggesting, but still have this title? Like, could it not be, and again, not a good movie, but could it not be the Bohemian Rhapsody thing where, yeah, that's the name of the movie, but that's not all we hit? Like,
yeah, for sure.
Okay, sure. There's an argument to be made. Charles Dickens is the man who invented Christmas. Like, that's the center of it. But you're a little bit broader about the history you're covering and a character piece about the man. And honestly, I think you could still even make it the flash in time, like Selma or something, where it's about the time where he was writing this book, but we just deal more with him as a writer and the other things he's written,
Yeah, and I don't even, when I say that, necessarily mean, I need, like, okay, here's the part where he writes, like, Oliver Twist
doesn't
and
need to
whatnot.
be his whole life.
Yeah, you don't even need any of that stuff. Like, you could just do just the short stories that led to this that most people probably don't even know about. You know what I mean? Just, if you want to do a specific The Christmas Carol kind of origin story.
Yeah, because Dickens wrote other Christmas stories. That's another thing that I was thinking about during this is, and I would need to look this up because I don't know, but I have a hardcover that's A Christmas Carol and other Dickens Christmas stories, and I've not read them, but...
I said, from my understanding, apparently...
When did he write those? Were those after this, or were those before this?
No, from my understanding, and maybe he wrote some stuff after, because I didn't look anything past A Christmas Carol. I just kind of looked at stuff before. But he had like a bunch of short stories about Christmas or about kind of ideas that end up going into A Christmas Carol. And they're before that, but they're just the prototype of those ideas. Like, it's just kind of things that he's thinking about that then all kind of form together to make this one story.
Because in this, he just kind of has this epiphany where he's like, oh, Christmas. Like, what if I wrote about that? And almost like, what if I tried to single-handedly bring it back from the brink of extinction? Like...
Yeah, exactly. And it's just, I don't know, it just kind of rings false, I think.
Precisely. I mean, that's the best way to put it. Did you not get... And maybe I'm... We watched this movie one time. Maybe I'm not remembering this or thinking about this quite right. But... the way it seemed to me was at the beginning of this movie, nobody really celebrates Christmas anymore. Like, it's a minor holiday. When it's said, and I'm not disputing that it was, because I've read that that's kind of the case at this point. What were the major holidays? I wanted them to talk about that.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah,
that'd be okay. If Christmas is a minor holiday, what's the big stuff that you guys like go all out for?
Hi, you want to celebrate Christmas, Dickens? We're over here only celebrating Snake Clubbing Day. Ha ha ha.
Was that smoking a snake? What was that?
He was just smoking. He was smoking, like, the big sticks with the cigarette at the end of it. No, when I looked into it, it seems like it was more of you had kind of a Victorian resurgence of Christmas, and A Christmas Carol was just right there at that time, and that kind of was a big part of it. Maybe not necessarily starting it, but once that happened, like, people looked at that and were like, A Christmas Carol.
Okay, because it seemed to me that at the end of the movie, suddenly more people were celebrating Christmas than you were led to believe they were at the beginning of the movie.
No, it's kind of
Did you have that?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
I think it's ultimately that Live Aid thing in Bohemian Rhapsody where the movie acts like, oh, Queen performed and now everybody's bringing the donations in. But in reality, the reason why that happened is because the head of it got on TV and was like, you need to give us your effing money. And people were like, oh my God, I can't believe you just said that on TV. Like, that's crazy.
Well, and you know what the big difference is between that and this? At least there was, in real life, like, technology that could make that happen. Like, the book just got published. in Victorian England in the 1800s. Like, it just happened. It's not like you don't get to see the influence of Dickens with Christmas in this movie, because you see the day he publishes it and then it's over.
Yeah, and especially, looking at Victorian times, like, that's kind of unfortunate that it's just all of a sudden, okay, everybody loves A Christmas Carol now, which, like, I get that's what we do for a lot of biopics. Like, you have stuff like, say, The Disaster Artist, where they go to the premiere of it and everybody's laughing at the movie, and they're like, oh, we made this great, like, so funny, it's, or so bad it's funny movie, when really that's not what happened. Like, that kind of came after.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like...
But it's too influenced by hindsight, right?
Exactly. This movie is way too influenced by hindsight. That's a perfect way to put it. So anyway, I guess if I had to flip, I have two wise men from the nativity scene. One is green, one is like a reddish purple. So, but I will give the reddish purple.
Well, that's unfortunate. But Carl Maxey, thanks a lot for suggesting this to us,
pink.
And sorry if we just ripped apart your favorite Christmas movie. But,
well, that's what you get with me. I'm heartless.
I'm glad I saw this finally, because I was sort of curious to see what they attempted with it, because like I said from the beginning, I was like, I don't know if that's a good idea, and I kind of walked it out feeling the same way. But boy, I don't know. I think we talk about it this long because, like, there's morsels, there's stuff you could have really run with, and it's I don't know. I don't even want to say it's nearly there, but like it needed some molding. It could have gotten there.
You know what this makes me like even more nervous about looking at is the J.R. Tolkien biopic they did, which does a kind of similar thing, and I already was like, I don't know if I want to watch that, because they completely cut C.S. Lewis out of his life, and that's what's interesting to me. But
yeah, I don't want to see that, honestly. But
yeah,
please don't request that. No, I'm kidding. Maybe it's good. I don't know.
It's on Disney Plus here. Maybe eventually I'll see it, but I don't know.
Next time we're doing a movie that came out in, I think, 2013, called About Time, which was requested by Gooster123, so we're going to do yours next time, and that, all I know about that is it is another time travel romance.
And I just know that it's about time, so...
It is. It's about time that we tackled About Time.
Yeah, well, it could be like Crash 4, which is also It's About Time.
Oh, I forgot that was the subtitle for that.
Mm-hmm. Because that game is about time.
I should probably play that at some point.
You should. It's wonderful. It's my game of the year that year. It's awesome.
Well, anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. We'll see you again next time. I was Captain Logan. This was The Day Ghost.
Bye, everybody. I'm going to go play Crash 4 now. Thank you, Cap.
Bye, Austin. Bye, everybody. See you later, folks.